Over the next few minutes, we will present a brief history of the private equity industry, spanning from about 1900 to the current day. So before 1900, merchant bankers buying and selling companies in Paris and London were one of the main ways companies traded hands. Some people date the beginning of the PE industry to 1901, when J.P. Morgan purchased Carnegie Steel for $480 million, which, depending on what measure of inflation you use, that would be a $15 billion to $20 billion transaction in 2022 dollars. But even up to the end of World War II, the closest we came to a private equity industry was wealthy families such as the Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, and Whitneys purchasing companies for their own account. In about 1960 or so, the managing partner, limited partner model of operating a private equity firm was introduced. That model is the way most firms are operated currently. So in this model, managing partners, which are also referred to as general partners, are responsible for making investments in companies. Managing partners are also responsible for securing capital commitments from investors, which are known as limited partners, or LPs. LPs are typically institutions, including pension funds, university endowments, insurance companies. LPs can also include high net worth individuals. When limited partners commit to investing in a fund, they do not know which companies the managing partners will acquire. In fact, as long as managing partners operate within the parameters of the limited partnership agreement, LPs have no say over which companies the MP acquires. In 1978, ERISA modified certain rules that had restricted where pension funds could invest. The change allowed pension funds to invest in private equity. In my opinion, this change is one of the main reasons private equity has grown to be the force that it is today. Over a 2-year span, from 1977 to 1979, the annual commitments to private equity went from $40 million per year to $600 million per year. And in 1980, the total amount of commitments to private equity was about $2.4 billion for the year. In the 1980s, it was not uncommon for early transactions to have debt-to-equity ratios of 90% debt and 10% equity. So in lay terms, what that means is if a company was acquired for $100 million, $90 million of the purchase price would be debt provided probably by a bank or other institution, and $10 million would be equity from the private equity firm. The 1990s were a boom time for private equity, with many well-known companies being bought and sold. And in those years, the industry continued to grow. By the year 2000, there were $310 billion in private equity commitments. During the 1990s and into the 2000s, PE firms reduced the amount of leverage they would use to acquire a company. But more importantly, and this is one of the greatest benefits PE firms have brought to the economy, these firms actively worked with the companies they acquired to make them better businesses. So this is worth discussing a bit further. Imagine a typical, relatively small privately owned company. Say it's owned by 2 people, generates $50 million of revenue a year, and produces about $4 million of cash flow. The owners of this business are making a great living. Why would they invest more in the business than necessary each year? Now imagine that company is acquired by a private equity firm. The PE firm seeks to generate a substantial return on its investment. In the 1980s, they may have focused on cutting headcount, putting pressure on suppliers for lower prices, and raising prices of the goods they produce. A PE firm no longer seeks to generate returns only through these types of cost-cutting measures. Now it will evaluate other ways to add value. That may include, for example, purchasing equipment that increases productivity, lowers costs, and increases quality. It may consider adding a more sophisticated ERP system to make better use of the company's resources, or it may provide employees with training that enhances their skills. In the end, the PE firm's goal is the same, which is to generate a strong return for its investors. But now they go about it in a different way than in the early decades of the industry. In conclusion, as we enter the latter portion of 2022, we see the PE industry has changed dramatically from the early 1900s and even from the early 2000s. To summarize, a couple of the biggest changes are: while it is institutions such as pension funds, endowments, and insurance companies that invest directly in PE funds as the limited partners, those companies are investing on behalf of individuals, and it is those individuals who derive much of the benefits from PE generating strong return. PE funds use far less leverage today than 20 or 30 years ago, which makes a PE buyout much less risky than in the past. And finally, in the early days of private equity, the funds generated returns by using financial leverage. They would put a large amount of debt on the company and pay the debt down over time and then sell the company. Today, many PE firms have dedicated teams of people who actively work with the companies they acquire to make them better businesses. So in the end, private equity industry benefits individuals and our economy in many ways.